My name is Frank Cilluffo. I have the privilege and pleasure to serve as our MC today, a role that I envision is part ringmaster, but mostly train conductor. We got a ton of issues to cover in a short amount of time to do it. So the tyranny of time requires me to sometimes be a tyrant. I'll cut people off to make sure we get through this amazing agenda. What a great event here for the Department of Homeland Security's Centers of Excellence Summit. There's some amazing programs. Do take the time for those of you that are not working with one of the COEs to get a sense of the cool work and important work everyone's doing to better defend and protect our homeland. I am going to be especially brief, which is not my strong suit. Anyone who knows me can attest I've never had an unspoken thought. But I do want to lay out two administrative agendas. One, in case of emergency, exits are there and there. Please go calmly. I'm sure there's a good COE study there in terms of evacuation planning that we can look into, but hopefully that won't be something we need to do this morning. I have the privilege to introduce the rector, a rector at George Mason University, our beautiful facility we're using here today, a long-standing and distinguished congressman who served my district exceedingly well, the 11th District of Virginia, and has had a very distinguished career, not only serving the men and women and women and men of Virginia, but also as a very prominent lawyer, a partner at Holland & Knight, just a little small law firm in DC, and just a distinguished gentleman with a distinguished career. He's going to do the initial introduction of our keynote speaker. And I might note, unfortunately, Admiral Pekoski could not be here today, but we're in great hands with Matt Coates. So Congressman Tom Davis, the floor is yours. Thank you and welcome.
So I'm distinguished because I left Congress undefeated and unindicted, something I'm very, very proud of. And when I left, I started teaching here at George Mason. I've taught a class here with Congressman Conley, with Congressman Moran when he was on the political science front. But I want to welcome you here today on behalf of the faculty, the staff, and the students, and the Board of Visitors, which I chair here at George Mason, to the second annual U.S. Department of Homeland Security Centers of Excellence Summit. George Mason is the Commonwealth of Virginia's largest public university with 38,000 students. Our graduates, I like to say this, make more than graduates of any other university in the state. Part of that is the jobs that we produce jobs for this region. So if you major in 18th century poetry, you probably don't go to George Mason. You probably have other options in the state. And I always get our 18th century poetry professor, we've got one, gets on me for saying it. So we have it, but that's not our specialty. Mason's also ranked as a research Tier 1 institution, a designation that places us among the top 125 research universities in the nation in terms of research expenditures. We have campuses here in Arlington. We have our campus out in Fairfax. We have one in Prince William County, and we have one in South Korea. So by any standard, we are a global university. Our students are very multinational. It's a majority-minority university. 40% of our undergraduates come from the community college. Many schools, like Amherst, where I went, pride themselves on who they don't take. We pride ourselves on who we do take. A lot of first-generation people giving them an opportunity to move up the ladder of economic opportunity. We're also unique in that our African-American, our Hispanic, our Asian, our Caucasian members all perform at basically the same level. It's almost indistinguishable in terms of their performance here at the university. So we're just very proud to be a university where everybody kind of works together. And we're not just diverse in terms of backgrounds, we're diverse philosophically. We have liberals and conservatives, and all views are welcome on this campus. Mason's Criminal Investigation and Network Analysis Center, which is playing a major role in this event, is one of 9 DHS centers that develop multidisciplinary, custom-driven Homeland Security science and technology solutions and help train the next generation of Homeland Security experts. We develop strategies and solutions to enhance criminal network analysis, forensics, and investigative processes for on-the-ground use by agents and officers to predict, thwart, and prosecute crimes. The purpose of this two-day summit is to bring together subject matter experts across academia, industry, and government to identify and discuss evolving homeland security challenges. I want to congratulate all those responsible for putting together today's and tomorrow's summit. It's an impressive agenda, panels, and speakers. I want to now introduce Matt Coates, who's the Director for the DHS Office of University Programs. You'll note from his very impressive bio that Matt is responsible for the overall strategy, development, and execution of the DHS Science and Technology Directorate's investments in early-stage, university-based research and development. Prior to serving as the director, he served in a variety of capacities at DHS, including being duly assigned as the deputy and lead program manager for 3 of the department centers of excellence. Before coming here, he was a senior consultant at Booz Allen Hamilton. And before I introduce Matt, I just want to tell a story. In Congress, I was active in this area. I remember going, we were always kind of rivals of Silicon Valley. Ironically, our unemployment rate here was always lower than Silicon Valley's. We felt in many ways we were more productive. We didn't get the press that they got. So I went out there and visited and met a guy, had lunch with a guy named Dr. Burt Rector, who just passed away, but he was dean of the Stanford University Laboratories. You remember, that whole area out there in the Bay Area has funneled with government-sponsored programs. You've got labs at Livermore, Sandia, Stanford, and Berkeley. But Dr. Rector told me about one of his colleagues at Stanford who won the Nobel Prize and found immediately upon winning the Nobel Prize, he could make more money giving speeches than he could either teaching, lecturing, or writing. So he went on this big speaking tour. And he could go out and he could make $25,000 a speech, sometimes even more, depending who the group was. And he was in such demand that on some days he could give 2 or even 3 speeches. Well, this guy had been in the academy all of his life. He really never cared about money. It was his intellectual pursuits, and the money's just pouring in. There are only so many liberal causes he could give it away to. So he decides, you know what? He says, I'm going to travel first class. So he gets one of these high-tech limousines, hires a full-time chauffeur. This thing had everything. Everything was digital, had the global positioning system, the wet bar, everything you need to travel in style. And he hired this chauffeur who'd pick him up and take him to his speeches. And some days he could make 2 or 3 speeches in a day. Well, one day they're between speeches, and the chauffeur turns around. He said, Professor, this isn't fair. He says, what do you mean? He said, sometimes, he says, look, I work longer than you do every day. I drive you through rain, snow, sleet, icy roads, heavy traffic. I've never gotten you there late. He said, and all you do is you go and give a speech. He said, but sometimes you make more in a day than I make in a year. He said, it just isn't fair. He said, but the worst part is, he said, I've had to listen to every one of your speeches. He said, in fact, I've heard your speech so many times, I think I can give it better than you can. Well, the professor said, all right. He said, you think it's that easy? He said, I'll tell you what, this next town, all they got's my curriculum vitae. They don't know what I look like. We're going to trade uniforms. You go in and give the speech. Don't embarrass me. He said, if you do it right, I'll give you the fee for this. He said, if you screw it up, it's going to be embarrassing. He said, no problem. So they trade uniforms. The Nobel laureate drives in, drops off at the arena, opens the door for the chauffeur. Chauffeur walks out, pretending he's a Nobel laureate. They usher him into the green room. He makes some small talk. Then he goes out, and they introduce him, and he gives a speech. But it's a huge crowd. And although he's memorized the speech, he's a little bit nervous. So his cadence is a little bit faster than the professor's usual delivery. But he gives the speech perfectly, flawlessly. But because his cadence is a little faster, he finishes up about 10 minutes ahead of schedule. Master of Ceremonies comes out, looks at his watch, hands the check. He said, ladies and gentlemen, this is entirely unexpected, but I see we have a few minutes for questions from the audience. First question. Professor, he said, I noticed in one of your earlier treatises where you discussed the effects of photosynthesis and sunspots and their effects on avic migration in southern New Zealand. He said, recent scientific periodical publications completely debunked this theory. I wonder if you could explain to us in some detail this dichotomy. The chauffeur's looking around, scratches his head. Then he looks straight at the questioner. He said, you ought to be embarrassed asking such a dumb, stupid question like that. In this room full of learned people, that question's so easy. He said, it's so simple. He said, I'm going to let my chauffeur in the back of the room answer it. Let's give a warm welcome to Matt Coates.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Rector Davis, for that overly nice welcome and sharing the story with us on this. Absolutely excited to be here today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to come here and spend a day and a half, hopefully, with us as we kind of walk through some really, really critical topics that are near and dear to the department's heart. We have a lot of challenges within DHS across the government, so definitely look forward to the discussions here. But as Rector Davis said, and you can see why we've chosen one of our centers of excellence to be George Mason University, doing some fantastic stuff here in terms of infrastructure investment, really, really geared towards solving real-world problems, diversifying the workforce, and really getting down to business with the components that do a lot of the tough work and most of the tough work within DHS. So many thanks to George Mason for hosting on that. I also wanted to extend a thank you to Dr. Tony Stefanidis. I don't know where Tony is. There he is. Tony, you and your team and the other directors pulling off this event in short order, giving exposure to our students and the great research that we've done, but more or less also connecting with the innovators in this space. Thank you for the hard work, and join me in just thanking Tony for this. So maybe I'll just shift gears a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time just because I want to get to the meat of the agenda here. Back in 2002, when the Homeland Security Act was stood up, there was an idea to set up some sort of a network, some leveraging capability to really partner with the university systems, right? So if you fast forward today, looking back at the 15, 16 years since the initiation of the first COE, I'm just in amazement in terms of what we've been able to accomplish, the structure and the growth that S&T as a directorate, as a headquarters level director, has been able to accomplish in terms of managing science quickly, working with innovators across different domains. It's really, really something special to be part of. And I think that you can start to, with events like this and maybe if you've been involved in any particular project, you can really, really see that. I'm going to brag a little bit and talk a little bit about the outputs. So from 2007 to 2018, I'm still waiting for this year's set of annual reports. We brought in $150 million of component-based money. This is money that is advancing concepts that S&T started as seedlings. We have 44 patents. We have 7,000 peer-reviewed journal articles. We have something like 130,000 students that have taken these courses. This is a pretty amazing set of outputs. And you say, well, are you output-oriented or outcome-oriented? I'll talk a little bit later about the difficulty of innovating in this space where there's so many different types of uncertainties. But clearly, the Office of University Programs, in partnership with our COEs, been able to be part of the tip of the spear, if you will. The ability to go out and get those ideas, quickly test them through rigorous processes, evaluate them for their utility, and then make a go, no-go decision point. This series of handoffs between scientists, institutions, that's what's necessary to innovate in this space. No one entity is going to be able to accomplish it on its own, and that's why the S&T and the rest of the department stands behind the centers in terms of what you guys do and what you mean to the innovation cycles that we have to be able to account for in this tough environment. So a couple other things I just wanted to touch on too. This wouldn't be possible without the direct and continuous engagement from our component partnership. One of the ways that we're able to maintain relevance in this world, right, where it's easy to get distracted by maybe what is most near and dear to your heart as a scientist, is that we've partnered systematically. We have 85 plus senior officials across the department. In some cases, we borrow from USDA and HHS and DoD where appropriate. But these individuals are committed over the long term in terms of providing the strategic guidance to S&T, strategic guidance to my staff, to make sure that we right-size the portfolio. And I think that is something really, really special given the fact that they have a day-to-day job that entails saving people's lives, right? Detecting bad stuff coming through our borders. And so we certainly couldn't do it without those 85 individuals. A couple other things that I wanted to talk about in terms of the structure of the the two topics that we're going to be talking about in the next couple of days. So one is gray zone threats. So many of you may not be familiar at all with what we mean by gray zone threat, but this is a terminology that kind of came up, really championed and used by the military. The military is really across the globe. And what it speaks to is this kind of awkward time somewhere between war and peace. It's really difficult to understand if you're being attacked, right? It somehow takes advantage of the legal system and the policies that any industry or organization or nation really has deployed. And it takes advantage of the fact that there's loopholes in this. There's opportunities to exploit infrastructure. There's opportunities to do nefarious things without necessarily evoking full-scale response from the military. So this is a tricky space that we find ourselves in. So today we're going to be talking about that. Complementary to that, in case you haven't noticed, we're becoming kind of hyper-connected. And when any organization has to deal with these changes in technology and the over-connectedness in terms of systems, talking to systems that maybe nobody knew about, when we look at this changes the threat space. And as an organization, as a department that is focused on risk, this changing kind of profile is something that we need to maintain general awareness of. And so as we look to our partners in the private sector, we look to our other federal and state partners, this is something that we want to make sure that we have a good bead on so that we can avoid general surprises. You know, I saw a statistic the other day, I think a 2007 report came out that said the U.S. Has been steadily increasing, minus 2012 and 2010, but we have about $542 billion in R&D. I think globally, from 2000, what we're seeing is trajectories of about upwards to about 19% each year, so we're at about 2.13 trillion globally on R&D. And what you can see is there's a lot of pressure to compete. There's a lot of pressure to compete economically. So this is driving industry to invest in their own products and services. This is driving, in some ways, the government to change where it's making its investments. And I think that with this desire to be competitive in today's market, there's absolutely opportunities to do things too quickly. Now, certainly as maybe a pseudo-bureaucrat up here, we certainly are very familiar with the speed in terms of how the government does business. But the reality is this desire to compete, this desire to get things deployed quickly, to maintain competitive advantage, this is changing the risk posture of our infrastructures. It's changing the risk, whether we know it or not, of a lot of the organizations that operate in this space. So today, with those two topics kind of as the backdrop, really, really excited for you guys to learn, to share, to listen to some great speakers up there. I did want to provide just a couple plugs to show, given that space that we're in, highlight maybe about 3 examples of some of the great work that the COEs do that represent different types of strengths and core competencies that are inherent to our network. So the first, I'm going to highlight our Critical Infrastructure Resilience Institute. So these guys started in 2015. They were a center that obviously has a wide aperture. Resilience means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Quickly working with the department, with our colleagues at the newly renamed CISA component, they were able to really take advantage of some great work that was done at NIST with a cybersecurity framework and really look to bring some meaning and help small, medium, and large manufacturers interpret what it means to do risk assessment with the ever-increasing adoption of IoT in different types of industrial control systems. And so we have a series of products, a suite of products that help inform and are really designed to help the private sector work through what risk means in their space. So you take these great reference documents, you're able to put a center working together in a pilot setting with manufacturers in partnership with CISA, and out pops a really, really fantastic guide that can be used by industry to really evaluate how risky their current networks and their posture is. Another center, I'm going to shift to a totally different domain that we have, in the Arctic. The Arctic is ever-changing. New commerce, for those that are following, there's been some new supply chains created over there where maybe certain countries are sending ships. We have this opening and this changing environment in which our United States Coast Guard has a mandate to operate in. There's infrastructure up there. Obviously, there's our oil and petrochemical natural gas. Our Arctic Center, ADAC, you'll see them in the tech showcase. They're working on creating prototypes on long-range underwater vehicles to monitor and track oil as it moves under different ice conditions. I mean, this is something that's really, really critical if we had an issue up in the Arctic. Another totally different example, our Alert Center up at Northeastern University. These guys ran 20 ADSA workshops. And they're really, really, I think, at the heart of what centers do best, and that's convene people that are much smarter than I am to talk about a lot of different pressing issues relative to their domain. So our Alert Center works in explosives detection, video analytics, and certainly underlying that is training the next generation of workforce. So you have some software development, you have kind of traditional engineering and R&D and prototyping, and then you have some of the softer skills of bringing people together to talk about some really tough challenges. So obviously you can tell I'm really, really proud of what these centers are doing. And one common theme that you're going to hear, I think tomorrow afternoon when our Acting Undersecretary, Mr. Bryan, is up here, is underlying all these centers. We're promoting advanced education. We're promoting and encouraging centers to think differently about how they train next generation workforce. Think about the types of skills that they're going to need, that the Department of Homeland Security is going to need. Work with their institutions and their partners to give those experiential learning opportunities to students. So we're absolutely interested in exploring internships and different types of programs that really drive value there. So I guess with that, I just wanted to close, to thank you, and certainly thank my staff, the OUP staff, the program managers that work hand in hand with the center directors. Deserve a round of applause as well, because these guys and women work really, really hard every day to make this stuff possible. So thank you to my staff. Okay, I think with that, I am done. I'm going to turn it back over to Frank. Thanks for the opportunity to share a couple thoughts. I'm going to be around for the next day and a half, so please grab me if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Matt, thank you, and thank you for giving everyone here a sense of the breadth and depth that science and technology brings to the many, 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 many challenges the Department of Homeland Security is responsible for engaging in. And I like to say, bringing a little bit of science to the art of policymaking and operations. And it's at that nexus where magic happens. And I'm starting to hear S&T is really in that magic business. So thank you for that.